And I wouldn't be surprised if President Trump sues the hell out of BBC. Fully entitled to, and the laws are much easier there than in the U.S. when you sue the media. If I were Trump, I'd say sue away because you have to make examples of these situations so that they never happen again because the impact is grave.
Bryan Lanza, a former communications director and advisor to Donald Trump, thank you so much for your time today.
Of course, thanks. Good to be here again.
Good to have you back on the show, Bryan, and good to get your analysis on so much that is happening in the last few days. Now, one of the big things that's happened, of course, is Donald Trump. Look, he must feel very vindicated today after an internal memo by a former BBC advisor accused the public broadcaster in the UK of editing two snippets of a speech from Trump on January 6th that were actually about an hour apart, and it kind of made Trump look as if he was telling his supporters to storm the Capitol. Trump's team called the BBC 100% fake news, terrible for democracy. The BBC's Director General and Head of News have both resigned and now apologised over this. So what is your reaction to this, Bryan?
Yeah, listen, I think it's the BBC's one of many outlets that aired that aired the footage that way. It was American outlets that were equally complicit in trying to insinuate and do the editing of Trump's speech to show that he had ordered this attack on the Capitol. And now we know, 4 years later, that it was a lie. Trump did not order the attack on the Capitol. That was an organic event that took place out of frustration. It wasn't an insurrection. It was a bunch of dumb people making dumb decisions in the heat of the moment. But I think what's jarring more than anything else is the narrative that people have as a result of that clip, right? That's just not a current clip. That's something that's been going on for 4 years now. I travel international all the time, and I'm forced to respond to these fake things. They ask me, how could have Trump ordered that attack? And I was like, where'd you get that information? They're like, British news, European news. It's all over the world. Now the good news is people have resigned. People are going to be held accountable. And I wouldn't be surprised if President Trump sues the hell out of BBC. Fully entitled to, and the laws are much easier there than in the U.S. when you sue the media. If I were Trump, I'd say sue away because you have to make examples of these situations so that they never happen again because the impact is grave.
Do you think it's grounds for defamation, Bryan?
Yeah, I do. This is the exact definition, right? It tried to define President Trump in an inaccurate way, willingly and knowingly, and most likely with malicious. Yeah, I think BBC has a tremendous amount of legal liability going forward from this American president, and the American president that I know will likely sue these people.
Do you think it proves that the UK broadcaster has always been biased towards Donald Trump ever since he kind of came into this political limelight around 2015?
I think it's clear. You're going to have now more people look back at other things and see what took place. So much happens so much so fast that you don't have a chance to look back to see what actually took place. But what took place is literally criminal. It is the definition of misinformation. The very thing that the UK says Russia is responsible for in Europe, UK is responsible for in Europe as well, and here in the US. I mean, we get BBC in the US. The same accusations that the UK government has said, about the Russians, we can now say, the United States can now say about the UK government with respect to misinformation. Credibility is destroyed.
Bryan, obviously this is quite a UK-centric story, as it is the publicly funded broadcaster, not through taxpayer money, but you have to pay a BBC license. So it still made waves across the international space. But former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, he wrote on X, he said, "We have Britain's national broadcaster using a flagship program to tell palpable untruths about Britain's closest ally." So do you think that this will damage ties with this allyship between the United States and Britain, or do you think that Donald Trump will look past it and think of it more as an isolated event for the BBC, not so much with the relationship with the UK?
I mean, listen, the President Trump that I know, it's probably going to sue and it's probably going to pull their license from operating in the United States because it is clear misinformation. It is clearly done to damage an American president with their allies abroad, and it's damaged the relationship. Look at whenever President Trump travels to the UK, the vast majority of those people's opinions have been filtered through the BBC. right? And now we know the BBC had their thumb on the scale to try to define the president, an American president, in a very negative way. I think your prime minister has to show an action plan to correct this, or the damage is going to continue to take place. He needs to go. The UK, this is a government entity, partially government entity. The UK prime minister needs to go on national television and say, listen, these guys got it wrong. They helped. They're defined a President Trump that doesn't exist, and we're correcting it. And there's going to be investigations. But to the UK people, President Trump is an ally to us. He's been an ally. He's been a strong ally. And all we can do is just apologize to the president that our people got it so wrong, maliciously wrong.
Brian, moving on to another big story of the day. Of course, this is more domestic, nothing to do with the international space, but it's day 41. Yesterday on Sunday, it was day 40 of the government shutdown. The Senate voted to advance a temporary funding bill that would essentially reopen the government through till January 2026 and delay debate on healthcare until a bit later. So the move, which saw a 60-40 vote, will pave the way for the government to hopefully reopen by the end of the week. So can you walk me through what happened here?
Yeah, I mean, the Democrats, as predicted, the Democrats capitulated. They realized what they were doing was wrong. They realized the damage that they were doing to the American people. You have to remember, the only reason we had the shutdown here in the United States is because Chuck Schumer didn't have the testicular fortitude to stand up to his left flank. And as a result of that, he decided to shut down the government, cause millions of damage to billions of economic damage, and hurt millions of people because he's scared of the radical left. And what you saw today is you saw some mainstream senators, the Democratic senators, and there's very few of them, but you saw some rational mainstream senators who decided not to punish the American people any further because Chuck Schumer doesn't have the balls to tell the left no. And that's where we are. And you notice today, Chuck didn't vote on it. This is the same thing that Schumer voted on in March. And so you have to ask yourself why. The only thing that's changed is that the left, the radical left, is becoming more aggressive in New York. They've just won the mayor's race. They just agreed to challenge Hakeem Jeffries in the next election. You know, the Democrats are involved in a civil war and they're eating each other up. And Chuck Schumer doesn't want to be that political, liability, and that's why he shut it down. And it took 10 senators, it took roughly 10 senators from the Democratic Party to ignore their leadership and open up government. Those senators should be cheered. That is a profiling courage. But you should look at Chuck Schumer and be ashamed that he put the damage on so many people because he didn't have the temerity to tell the left enough.
Well, Brian, obviously the Democrats' argument is not that it's their fault for the government shutdown, but we won't get into it. But you mentioned these Democrats that broke from their own party. I think it was 8 or 10 of them, and none of them are up for re-election in 2026, including Dick Durbin, who's actually retiring. So there's not that risk of it affecting their election. But do you think this plays into the fact that they were willing to break rank with the party, or are they kind of similar to John Fetterman, who also voted alongside Republicans, in the sense that he was very outspoken, that he was impatient with this shutdown. He wanted it to end and for workers to be paid?
Listen, I think you had some Democrats say enough is enough. We cannot be held hostage by the extreme left of our party, the progressives who believe in socialism, the progressives who wanted to fund the police, the progressives who don't believe in private property. And you had some senators that we're not part of this. We're not part of this crazy bus. We want off. And that's what you saw. I think the thing is they're scared. Mainstream Democrats are scared. And keep in mind, mainstream Democrats are still left. They're just not crazy left, right? And I think they're still scared of the base, which is very triggered, which is very activated, and they want craziness. And what you had were 10 senators say, listen, we're not going to put crazy before feeding the American family.
But on the other end of the spectrum, Brian, there's a lot that could be said about the same thing, but for the Republican Party, that there are some mild Republicans who feel as if they can't speak up against the ultra MAGA, against Donald Trump for fear of, retribution, for fear that Donald Trump will go against them.
Yeah, I hear that, but it's just not true. I mean, the reality is you have several congressmen who have spoken out against President Trump on some of his policies, and you don't see any type of retribution. You got
Well,
congressmen.
you see it online, Brian. You see Donald Trump calling them out and literally.
Calling them out is being held accountable. Let's be clear. What you're calling them out is you're telling your voters, these are what these guys are doing. And if being accountable is a problem for you, you should get out of the public space.
Well, on the note of kind of going against your own party, obviously the Senate has now done their part on this government shutdown, and we need the House to do theirs by voting on this bill as well. But House Speaker Mike Johnson has the House still on recess. Do you think he'll be forced to call them back in?
Yes. I mean, that's just the process.
But if Johnson is apprehensive to do this, does it,
Why is
and
he
knowing that,
apprehensive? He wants to open up the government.
but Mike Johnson has had them on recess for ages now, and
Yeah,
there's,
because there's nothing for them to do but pass the CR, which they did.
but you've had Republicans like Marjorie Taylor Greene come out and say, why are we not at work? Because
No, they are at work. They're at work in their districts. They're not sitting at home. They're not sitting on the beach. These elected officials are in their districts, in their neighborhoods, holding meetings. I mean, I was just here, last week, and I was with several members of Congress holding meetings. They're just not voting and on the floor, but they're here.
So you don't believe Thomas Massey, who says the only reason why they're on recess is because he's avoiding swearing in a newly
No.
elected Congresswoman Adelita Grahava?
No. It has nothing to do with it. The reason we're in shutdown is to make sure, or the reason the House is not in session is to make sure we put pressure that we get the government to open up. We're now seeing that the Senate has done their job. It's now the House to do their jobs, and that's the only reason. Now, people can speculate because that gets them clickbait, that gets them Twitter attention, that maybe gets them some money. And that's fine. That's what people do. But don't be fooled by those actions as opposed to what's actually happening.
So what happens when they do come back in and they are forced to take a vote on this discharge petition? That would mean that the House was voting on whether to release the Epstein files or not. Is it a big deal, Brian, or does the Republican Party actually not really care?
Nobody cares.
Interesting. Just moving on, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, he was on ABC. He admitted that under the 41-day government shutdown, it's obviously had an impact on the economy. He said, we've seen an impact from day one. It's getting worse and worse. We had a fantastic economy under President Trump for the past 2 quarters, and now there are estimates that the economic growth for this quarter could be cut as much as half if the shutdown continues. So he obviously ended up getting what he wanted because he basically said that they need 5 senators to vote with Republicans, which is, of course, exactly what happened. But for President Trump, Brian, who obviously prides himself on prioritizing a strong economy, would this be weighing on him?
Oh, this has an impact, right? The Democrats shutting down the government the way they did, is an estimated cost. I think it was $15 billion a day as a result of this. Times that by 40, you're now at $500 billion of an economic impact. Yeah, it clearly has had its effect that the Democrats want, right? Now it's President Trump's job and the Republicans' job to do the things that are going to put the economy in the right place. Lower tariffs ultimately. Invest in the right things. Invest in the right markets that are going to be deregulate. Those are the things that, drive down the cost of energy. Those are the things that are going to stimulate this economy. And I think that's what the administration's focused on.
Brian, for a really long time there in 2021, and I'm sure that you were very much across this, but when there were large crowd gatherings and when there were sporting matches, a lot of spectators were booing Joe Biden, even though he wasn't there. They were screaming, "Let's go, Brandon," and you, of course, remember that. But Donald Trump, he copped that same criticism on the weekend when he dropped into the Washington Commanders game with the Detroit Lions. So it's no secret Donald Trump loves to be liked. So do you think that this booing of him would have offended him?
No, by the way, he also loves to be hated, for the record. So as much as he likes to be liked, he loves to be hated. He loves to make sure you're thinking about him. No, I don't think it matters. I mean, listen, the reality is every American politician, even Barack Obama, when they go to these sporting events, they get booed. Nobody wants to see a politician at a sporting event. We want to watch the game. And these politicians take their risk. President Trump took that risk. There's some places that aren't as aggressive, but you don't interrupt the football game.
Well, he seems to be welcomed at any golf match, Brian.
Yeah, whatever. Golf is boring.
ESPN is reporting that sources have told them that Donald Trump wants the new Commanders Stadium, which cost around $3.5 billion, to be named after him. According to these sources, there's been back-channel communications between the White House and the Commanders' ownership about this naming. Do you see this going through?
Um, I have to be careful what I say because existing clients. But I would say this: President Trump very eagerly loves having his name in places, and he'd love to have RFK Stadium replaced with DJT Stadium.
Mm. The Democrats obviously had a few big wins last Tuesday at the off-year election. So in a CNN interview, California Governor Gavin Newsom was asked about it. He said what happened on Tuesday represents a new moment of clarity, conviction, purpose, energy on our toes, not on our heels, a resurgent Democrat Party. The kind of momentum and direction is, I think, we're really going to enliven people in the next year. He said, I think Donald Trump did not expect what Californians did. He thought we would just try to win an argument by writing an op-ed, maybe expressed disdain and concern, saying it was no longer the Democratic Party of old. Now, the Democratic Party of old, Brian, that's a pretty a crazy dig to former President Donald Trump there. Former President Joe Biden there. Is the party still angry at Biden for what happened last year, do you think?
I think the party's just angry, whether it's at Biden, whether it's at Kamala Harris, whether it's at Gavin Newsom. They're just angry for their failed leadership for the last 4 years, and in Gavin's circumstances, 6 years. California is a train wreck. They've lost three. They've lost three congressional districts during Gavin Newsom's tenure. People are leaving. The vote. Listen, the vote of confidence that you get when states come to your state because they feel there's a future there. California doesn't have that, and so yes, what happened on Tuesday. Guess what? We all knew it was going to happen the day after Donald Trump won the election in 2024, because it's what always happens. New Jersey went blue, Virginia went blue, and New York City went blue. Not a shocker. And as for blue California voting to redistrict, why are we surprised by that? It's blue California. They're going to do whatever the Democrats want them to do.
Just finally, Brian Newsom said that he hadn't made up his mind regarding presidential ambitions for 2028. He said he'd make up his mind after next year's midterms. But I just want to read out this poll to you, because Politico published a poll last week which asked Kamala Harris 2024 voters who they considered their leader of the party to be. And a majority, which was 21%, said nobody, while Newsom was in seventh place at 6.2%. So what does that say to you?
Listen, I'm a Californian. I've been involved in California politics my entire political career. We have a failed state right now. We have a failed governor, failure in education, failure in job growth, failure in investments. Across the board, it is a failed state. So I'm actually surprised Gavin Newsom's at 7, because if you were to get rated on your actual record, I suspect he'd be somewhere at 51. And keep in mind, we only have 50 states.
Bryan Lanza, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report.
Thank you. My pleasure.